എല്ലാവർക്കും നമസ്കാരം. Basically, I am not a student of media studies or literature, or I am not a film critic as well. I am a student of political science. So whatever I say would be from that back, on the basis of that perspective. ഇത് ബേസിക്കലി 2007 PT കുഞ്ഞു മുഹമ്മദ് എഴുതി, തിരക്കഥ എഴുതി, സംഭാഷണം നൽകി, സംവിധാനം ചെയ്ത പരദേശി എന്ന് പറയുന്ന മലയാള സിനിമയെ അടിസ്ഥാനപ്പെടുത്തിയിട്ടാണ് ഇത്തരമൊരു പേപ്പർ പ്രസൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യാമെന്ന് ഞാൻ വിചാരിച്ചത്. ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു, ഞാനൊരു പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ സയൻസ് സ്റ്റുഡൻ്റ് ആയതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ, മാത്രമല്ല ഇന്ത്യ പാർട്ടീഷനെ കുറിച്ച് പഠിക്കാനായിട്ട് ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വിദ്യാർത്ഥി എന്നുള്ള നിലയിൽ ആ ഒരു പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ സയൻസ് സബ്ജക്റ്റിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഫ്രെയിംവർക്കിനകത്ത് നിന്നുകൊണ്ടായിരിക്കും ഞാൻ ഈ വിഷയം കൈകാര്യം ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. പിന്നെ മഞ്ജുഷ ടീച്ചർ എന്നോട് ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു സെമിനാർ ഉണ്ട്, അതിന് പങ്കെടുക്കണം, പേപ്പർ പ്രസൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യണമെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ ആദ്യം ശ്രദ്ധിച്ചത് ടോപ്പിക് ബോർഡർ എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ബോർഡർ എന്ന് ഞാൻ ആ വാക്ക് കേട്ടപ്പോൾ തന്നെ എൻ്റെ മനസ്സിലേക്ക് ആദ്യം വന്ന ആ ഒരു പിക്ചർ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഈ പരദേശിയിലെ മോഹൻലാൽ അഭിനയിച്ച മൂസ എന്ന കഥാപാത്രത്തിൻ്റെ ആ ഒരു ഫ്രെയിമാണ്. അപ്പോൾ തന്നെ ഞാനപ്പോൾ ടീച്ചറോട് പറഞ്ഞു, ഞാനിതേക്കുറിച്ചിട്ടൊരു പേപ്പർ തീർച്ചയായും പ്രസൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യാം. അങ്ങനെ പറയാനുള്ള മറ്റൊരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കാരണം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്, ഇപ്പോൾ നമ്മുടെ ഇന്ത്യയിൽ സംഭവിച്ചു കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന ഈ രാഷ്ട്രീയ സംഭവ വികാസങ്ങൾ, പ്രത്യേകിച്ചും നമുക്കറിയാം അസം പോലെയുള്ള ഒരു സംസ്ഥാനത്തിൽ ഏകദേശം 20 ലക്ഷത്തോളം ആളുകൾ അവരുടെ ദേശീയത എന്താണ് എന്ന്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവർ ഏത് ദേശത്തിൽ പെടുന്ന ആളുകളാണ് എന്നുള്ളതെ കുറിച്ച് ഒരു ചോദ്യചിഹ്നം നമ്മൾ ഉയർന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇവർ ഇനി എന്താണ് ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ഇന്ത്യ ഗവൺമെൻറ് ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്? ഇവരെ ഇന്ത്യയിൽ നിലനിർത്തുമോ, അതല്ല ഇന്ത്യയിൽ നിന്നും നാട് കടത്തുമോ? അപ്പോൾ ഇത്തരം പ്രശ്നങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ച് ചർച്ച ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് നമുക്ക് മലയാളത്തിൽ അവൈലബിൾ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഏറ്റവും നല്ല ഒരു സിനിമ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് പരദേശിയാണ് എന്നുള്ളത് കൊണ്ടാണ് ഞാൻ ഇത്തരമൊരു സിനിമയെക്കുറിച്ച്, പ്രത്യേകിച്ചും പാർട്ടീഷനുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട ഒരു സിനിമയാണെങ്കിൽ പോലും ഇപ്പോഴും അതിൻ്റെ പ്രാധാന്യം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് പൂർണ്ണമായിട്ടും നശിച്ചിട്ടില്ല എന്ന് മാത്രമല്ല, ദിവസം കഴിയുന്തോറും അതിൻ്റെ പ്രസക്തി ഏറി വരികയാണ് എന്നുള്ളതാണ് എനിക്ക് മനസ്സിലായിട്ടുള്ളത്. അപ്പം അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ ആ ഒരു കാഴ്ചപ്പാടിലായിരിക്കും ഞാനിവിടെ പറയുന്ന കാര്യങ്ങൾ. പിന്നെ ഇന്ന് we all know that today is December 6th. December 6th എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ അതിൻ്റെ വളരെ യാദൃച്ഛികമായിട്ടാണ് ഈ December 6th എന്നുള്ള ഈ ഒരു ഡേറ്റിൽ എനിക്ക് ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു പ്രസൻറ്റേഷൻ, ഐ ഗോട്ട് an opportunity to present my paper on this, exactly on this day, on this topic. So there are actually two issues. Like there are basically, when we take into account this December 6th, it is significant in two significant ways as far as India is concerned. The first one is, we all know that it was on 6th December 1992 that Babri Masjid was demolished. As far as this minority rights is concerned, especially when we take into account Muslims especially, you can see that it was the demolition of Babri Masjid was a watershed as far as the rights of the Muslims which were guaranteed by the Indian Constitution is concerned. And the second one is the death of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. He died 63 years ago in 1956. So basically it was Ambedkar who fought throughout his life for the rights of the marginalized sections of India. And it was he who fought for the rights of minorities throughout his life, before as well as after India's partition. So we cannot talk about minority rights or the constitutional values without taking into account his views on what is nation, his views on partition, as well as the constitutional values. When we talk about constitutional values, today everyone is talking about constitutional values. So when we talk about constitutional values, we cannot talk about constitutional values without forgetting his views on nation, nationalism, citizenship, etc. So this is the definition that he has given to nation. ദേശീയതയെക്കുറിച്ചും ദേശത്തെക്കുറിച്ചും ഇതിനു മുൻപും sorry ma'am for talking in Malayalam as well. ത്തെക്കുറിച്ചും അതുപോലെ ദേശം, ദേശീയത, അതുപോലെ പൗരത്വം, ഇതേക്കുറിച്ചൊക്കെ തന്നെ അംബേദ്കർക്ക് മുൻപും പല ആളുകളും, ഇപ്പം മേണസ് റെയ്നനെ പോലെയുള്ള ആളുകൾ ഇതേക്കുറിച്ച് നിർവചനങ്ങൾ നൽകിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ അതിനെ ഇന്ത്യയുടെ സാഹചര്യവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെടുത്തി ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ നല്ല രീതിയിൽ ഏറ്റവും നന്നായി നിർവചിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ചിന്തകൻ എന്ന് പറയാൻ പറ്റുന്നത് അംബേദ്കറെയാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ അംബേദ്കർ ദേശത്തെക്കുറിച്ച് പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുള്ളത് ഇങ്ങനെയാണ്: A nation is not a physical thing in which certain objective characteristics such as commonality of language, race, territory, etc. persist. Nation, on the contrary, is a spiritual reality binding people a deep comradeship. It is a feeling of possessing things in common in life, of communication, participation, and of sharing with all those who constitute one nation. So nation is a mode of associated living, of conjoined communicated experience. So this is the definition given by Ambedkar on nation. So we all know that the state of Pakistan, when we talk about India's partition, the state of Pakistan was created on the basis of the idea that the Muslims in India constitute a separate nation. So it was to fulfill that dream that the Muslims constitute a separate nation, and therefore a separate homeland should be created for them, that the Muslim League fought for Pakistan. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he is considered as the sole spokesman of India, sole spokesman of Pakistan. He asserted in his presidential address in Lahore in 1940 that the Muslims are a nation by any definition, and if the British government is really earnest and sincere to secure the peace and happiness of the people of this subcontinent, the only course open is to allow the major nations separate homelands by dividing India into autonomous nation states. So he wants that India should be divided on the basis of nation, that is, Muslims are a separate nation. In his conception, Muslims constitute a separate nation in India, so a separate nation should be, a separate state should be constituted for them. Similarly, in Lahore Resolution 1940, Lahore Muslim League stated that no constitutional plan would be workable in this country or acceptable to Muslims unless it is designed on the following principles, namely that geographically contiguous units are demarcated into regions which should be so constituted with such territorial readjustments as may be necessary, that the areas in which Muslims numerically in a majority, as in the northwestern and eastern zones of India, should be grouped to constitute independent states in which the constituent unit shall be autonomous and sovereign. So he wanted to separate the Muslim majority regions from the mainland India, and a separate state should be constituted for the Muslims. So that was their vision in 1940. The people who lent their support to this idea of a nation was basically the Muslims from their minority provinces, not the Muslims from their majority provinces. Till the mid-1940s. It was only in the later period that the Muslims in the majority provinces also came to their fold. Till that time, it was basically the Muslims from the minority provinces. So it means Muslims from the Hindu majority provinces that who lent their support to the Muslim League demand for Pakistan. So it was to satisfy the League demand for a separate homeland that the British government, in consultation with the leadership of the International Congress as well as the Muslim League, went for separating Muslim majority regions, not provinces as such, Muslim majority regions from in British India, and constitute a separate state known as Pakistan, and the plan came in June 3rd, 1947. That is what we call Mountbatten Plan. But when But what happened was that when the Pakistan did actually come into existence in 1947, massive population exchanges occurred between the two newly formed states in the months immediately following the partition, accompanied by horrific violence and refugee crisis. It created a huge refugee crisis. Actually, the crisis came not at the time of partition. It came after the partition, because we know that even the partition plan was not, it was not made public. They kept it secret for a long time, and it was only later that the people came to know that no, we are not in India. No, many people, they came to know that we are not in India. They thought that they would be in India, but they came to know that we are not in India. Many people came to know that they are not in Pakistan. So the issue happened. No, the whole problem, the whole horrific violence and all happened after partition. So many of the people who were basically demanding partition, including Ambedkar, when we look at his thesis on Pakistan, we will come to know that he was also in favor of population transfer if it is necessary. Like, he was also supporting that. But he also did not, no leadership, no political leader could understand the real consequences of population transfer. They did not understand its significance, the magnitude of population transfer which took place after 1947. Even though this picture is basically on Bengal, we know that the Muslims basically demanded for a united Bengal and Punjab. We should include Punjab as well. United Bengal and Punjab in a divided India. Whereas the Hindus, they demanded a divided Bengal in united India. So if you go through the works on partition, especially by Jaya Chatterjee, we'll come to know the significance of this picture. Whereas international Congress led by Gandhi demanded a united Bengal and united Punjab in united India. Whereas the Britishers, as a compromise, they went for a divided Bengal in divided India. So when we talk about the violence which took place in during the time of partition, we can see that I think there are different estimates on the number of deaths which took place. People argue that it's around 5 lakh. So other people argue that it's like 1 million. Then people say that it's 2 million. Like that. So it varies from 2 lakh to 20 lakh. But still, we all know that it was a horrific incident which took place at that time. Men were brutally killed, women were raped, they were abducted, they were converted to other religions and get married off to other people from other communities. So that was a kind of violence. Along with that, the exodus also took place. Actually, this was along with this partition violence, the rehabilitation, refugee crisis and rehabilitation was a serious issue immediately after partition. Since 1947, we can see from August, September, October onwards, this became a huge issue. So the newly formed governments, they had not anticipated and were completely unequipped for the two-way migration of such a staggering magnitude which took place after partition. So massive violence and slaughter occurred on both sides of the new India-Pakistan border. And the worst case of all such violence had taken place in two provinces, that is Bengal and Punjab. So many historians argue that partition violence would not have taken place if these two provinces were not partitioned. So there are historians who argue like that. So the governments both in India and Pakistan did not have any idea of mass migration, or they did not have any rehabilitation policies even if they migrate. And at a press conference in New Delhi on 12th October 1947, the then Prime Minister of India, Nehru, he said that there was no policy with regard to the exchange of population between the two countries, and that there was no talk of it before August 15th. So none of us envisaged a major transfer of population at any time. That was a statement given by Nehru himself. So almost 1 million people were perished and another 20 million people were displaced as a whole in South Asia as a part of partition, and making it one of the largest displacement in the 20th century. So, and the only comparison to this displacement was the displacement of people in Europe during the time of Second World War. So that was the magnitude of population movement
refugee crisis which are taking place in India in the mid 20th century. So when we look at the people in terms of their religious identity, what we can see is that Muslims from India started to migrate to Pakistan and the Hindus started to migrate to India. The Indian Muslims, when we look at the western side of India, we can see that the Muslims in India migrated to west to Pakistan, mainly from the districts of UP, at present UP, then Bihar, then Madhya Pradesh. People moved even from South Indian states like Andhra Pradesh, then Kerala, Tamil Nadu, etc. And on the other side, when we look at Pakistan, the western Pakistan, the people who migrated to India were mainly Hindus and Sikhs. And in the case of East Bengal, eastern side of India, people migrated from East Pakistan or East Bengal to Indian side, and the people from West Bengal, especially the Muslims, they migrated to the eastern side, because before partition we know that the eastern districts of Bengal were dominated by Muslims, and the western districts, western provinces are also dominated by Muslims. These two regions were separated from the mainland India in order to constitute Pakistan. But the fact is that even at that time, the population, the Hindu population and Sikh population were also significant in those provinces, even though they were not a majority. See, if you look at Punjab, then Punjab, Sindh, we can see that almost more than 40% of the population were constituted by Hindus and Sikhs together. And that was the case with Bengal as well. Even though the Muslims were a majority, if we look at Bengal, we can see that around 55% of the people were Muslims, but the rest of the people were Hindus. So actually we partitioned these two provinces on the basis of what we say, the religious identity. So with the partition of the country, once the exodus gained its momentum, this refugee rehabilitation, the major problem, both the governments in India as well as in Pakistan, they faced immediately after partition was this refugee rehabilitation. It became a serious issue in both the states. Basically, in Malayalam there is one movie, we know, Vastuhara. Basically, this movie was based on the refugee crisis which was there in Calcutta. It was basically based on the Hindu refugee problem in Calcutta. Those who migrated from eastern Pakistan to West Bengal, and they were rehabilitated in Calcutta. Basically, Vastuhara is basically on that. There are numerous studies on partition in academics. When we look at academics, we can see there were studies based on British perspective, then Indian nationalist perspective from Pakistan side. There are different kinds of studies on India's partition, but the major problem raised by many of its critics was that it was basically elitist in nature. They did not take into account the struggles that through these speeches we can see that it was basically the ordinary people who suffered with this partition. But the struggles or the kind of problems that they gone through in their life, they did not take into account that aspect. But it was only with the emergence of post-colonial studies or subaltern studies by 1980s that this kind of aspects also got some kind of attention in academics. Till that time we were basically elitist. Our academicians were basically elitist in nature. So instead of focusing on the elites, the subaltern school or post-colonial school, they paid attention more on the marginalized sections of the society based on their class, caste, gender, race, then language, culture, etc. and using alternative sources of history. So that was the significance. That is a kind of history from below, not from the above. So efforts were made by historians, both subaltern school and others, to remake the meaning of partition with narratives drawn from the everyday lives of the ordinary people. So the most important among them were Gyanendra Pandey, Urvashi Bhutalia, we know, the other side of silence, then Ritu Menon, Kamala Bashin, Wazira Zamindar, Then, for example, when we look at Pandey, he wrote powerfully on the partition violence experienced by the people. But whereas Butalia, she focused more on the stories of women, children, and Dalits. And this, she probed not only the partition's violence, but also the violence implicit in the imposition of official narratives on partition's meanings. Whereas Ritu Menon and Kamala Bashan explored the critical role of gender, not only in the structure of the partition violence, but also in the reconstruction of subsequent national authority. Then Wazira Zamindar, on the other hand, recounted the deep-seated impact of partition's violence and migration on the attempted creation of national citizens on both sides of India-Pakistan border. But, so this is about the studies on partition. But when we come to movies, what we see is that even though there are numerous studies on India's partition since 1940s, no corresponding number of films could be seen in the visual media, though India tops in terms of the number of films produced every year. Thousands of films are produced every year in India. ഇന്ത്യയിലെ സിനിമകളെ കുറിച്ച് പറയുമ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് സത്യത്തിൽ ഈ മൂവി എന്ന് പറയുന്ന മോഷൻ പിക്ചർ ഈ സംഗതി ലോകത്ത് ആദ്യമായിട്ട് നിലവിൽ വന്ന് 6 മാസങ്ങൾക്കുള്ളിൽ തന്നെ ഇറ്റ് റീച്ച് ഇന്ത്യ. ഇമ്മീഡിയറ്റ്ലി ആഫ്റ്റർ ലൈക്ക് വിതിൻ 6 months ആഫ്റ്റർ ദിസ് മൂവി came to the world, it reached Bombay. But still there is no such, like when we look at the movies produced every year, there is no corresponding number of movies produced based on this problem. Even though this was a serious issue that the whole subcontinent had faced at that time. So in the years immediately following independence, Indian cinema was caught up in the collective endeavor of nation building, which was common to all modern nation states. This was particularly significant in the case of India because of its cultural diversity as well as the deep cut inflicted by partition in its soul. The Indian cinema neglected the traumatic experiences of partition and centered around the natural unity of the nation. So if the popular cinema in the 1950s and 60s had steered clearly off partition, deeming the episode to be too brutal and upsetting to be brought alive on the screen, contemporary films on partition promotes forgetfulness. So this is a major problem that I think we talk about the movies. One important issue. Then the partition, similarly, the partition had also left its deep impact in the Indian film industry immediately after independence in innumerable ways. One important reason for Indian film industry to keep away from engaging with the sensitive issues like Pakistan was their fear of controversy and the fear of personal safety. So even when they touched the issues, they glossed over political contradictions or contestation by projecting universal and humanist angles. So that was a kind of attitude the Indian cinema generally had towards partition. For example, Yash Chopra's film Dharamputra, which was released in 1961 by focusing on Hindu fundamentalism, made an impassioned plea for communal harmony within the independent nation state. Similarly, if Mahbub Khan's epic film Mother India endorsed the Nehruvian development model, other filmmakers like Raj Kapoor or B.R. Chopra upheld Nehru's tenets of socialism, secularism and democracy in their own films. On the other hand, actors like Dilip Kumar, when we say Dilip Kumar, basically he was a Muslim and his real name was Yusuf Khan, but he never used that name. He took another name when he came to this field, except someone suggested this name to him. He himself did not take it, someone suggested, but he kept that name throughout his life. Except in one movie, that is Mughal-e Azam, he never played any Muslim character of contemporary relevance in his whole film career, which peaked during the Nehru years of 1947-64. This is the argument made by this Meghnad Desai, sir. Lord Meghnad Desai made this argument in one of his books on Dilip Kumar, which he published recently. Another movie is Garam Hawa. It was directed by M.S. Satyu, which was released in 1974. Basically, this movie came after, Pakistan's partition in 1971, after the formation of Bangladesh. So, it visualized the tormented life of a Muslim gentleman in partition in India. But when we, I will, if I'll get time, we can discuss in detail about comparative study of Garam Hava and this Paradesi. But for the time being, I'm leaving it now. Actually, when we look at the like the concluding part of this movie, what we can see is that it is visualized, it ends with a reiteration of the possibility of a nationalist position dedicated to the promotion of secular and democratic ideals. I'm not saying that this should not be promoted, but I have certain difference of opinion with the way in which it was projected. Instead of addressing the specificities of the Muslim self in India in the wake of partition, the movie focused on the collective struggle for justice and equality in the tormented nation. Then when we come to the 1980s, with the rise of Hindutva politics in the 1980s challenging the Nehruvian model of secularism had its impact in Indian cinema as well, especially in the Bollywood movies. The rise of militancy in Kashmir and the communal violence in North India following the demolition of Babri Masjid in 1992 once again brought the Muslim loyalty towards the nation into discussion and pictured the Muslims in a poor light. Then, if the movies in the past projected Muslims as disloyal citizens, in the changed circumstances, there is a cynical attempt to portray them as either anti-nationals or terrorists ready to cooperate with the Islamists outside the country against the nation. The influence of Bollywood in portraying Muslims in negative roles could be seen in Malayalam movies as well since the 1990s, and received a fillip with the 9/11 incident and the resultant war on terror by the United States in Afghanistan on the one hand, and the Indian Parliament attack in December 2001 on the other. But this is a negative side of what we say. Indian movies, but at the same time, in its positive side, when we look at the period 1990s, the issues of identity, secularism, and citizenship became a topic of open discussion only in the 1990s and became widespread in the millennium, which were considered as a taboo for nearly 40 years since India's partition. Basically, it is in this context that K.T. Kunju Muhammad made this film Paradesi, which was released in 2007. Basically, this movie talks about the story of the fragmented lives of Muslims in India. There is a community which had to bear the brunt of India's partition and continues to live in it. So this was basically not an incident which happened in, as Wasira Semindar says, it is a long partition. No, we have to say it in that term itself, I think. Because it was not an incident. It was basically a phenomena which took place in 1947. They had to bear the brunt of India's partition and continues to live in it. Even after 70 years of the event which had happened in 1947, it centers on the hardships that an old man, this role was played by Mohanlal, and the name of that character was Valiyagat Musa. So it centers on the hardship that an old man had to face at the fag end of his life because of being a foreign national. These are the important characters in the movie. Valiyagat Musa was played by Mohanlal. The one is Amina. Amina is Musa's wife. The third one is Usha. Basically, she is a freelance journalist who tried to document the lives of these people who had to face this problem like Musa. There are many other characters who also had to face the same kind of problem. Another one is Abdul Rahman. He is a friend of Musa. He was also declared as a foreign national by the ministry, even though he was born and brought up in India, but later migrated to. He was not migrated basically. He was settled in Pakistan before its formation. Hamza. Then Khadija. Actually, she was a relative of Musa, but she was actually got married to another Pakistani national, and later she came back. But she also had to face the same way. This is Advocate Ramakrishnan. This role was played by V.K. Sriraman. He was the one who handled the case of Musa in the courts. Actually, this character is highly significant. His name is Shamsuddin. Basically, even though he belonged to this Muslim community, he was the one who brutalized all these people. When we look at this movie, he was the most, horrific police officer. He was deported to Pakistan by the Indian police, and he died in Pakistani jail. So Waligat Musa was born. So these are the important characters in this movie. And when we talk about the movie, we can. Waligat Musa was basically born and brought up in Malabar, but he escaped first to Bombay. And later he settled in Karachi in search of job in order to sustain his family. Then he returned to India after partition with a Pakistan passport as a travel document. This is significant. We should travel document. He used the Pakistan passport as a travel document without realizing that it's going to change the rest of his life forever. But once the movie progresses, we will come to know that his story is not an exception, and there are numerous people like him, like Hamza, like Rain, like Usman. So both men and women, like Khadija, who all had to face the brutalities of the state because of their status as enemy aliens. So Pardeshi, through portraying the tragic life of its characters, attempts to problematize the parameters that define the nation, nationality, and citizenship. The film is political in the sense that it denies the dominant narratives on nation or nationalism while siding with those who were victimized by hegemonic nationalism. So when we look at the movie starts with Musa standing right below a tree in front of the police station, Manjeri police station. This is basically, Manjeri is a place located in Malappuram district of Kerala. Basically, Malappuram is a Muslim dominated district in Kerala. It is in Malappuram that this Malabar rebellion which took place in 1921 against the Britishers. And Musa enters the police station only when his name is called out from inside. This scene is significant because the police is an important agency. We all know that police is an important agency of the state to discipline the citizens through exercising its authority over them. The police as a coercive machinery of the state is revealed in the first scene itself through the cruelty committed by the police officers on two petty criminals, even while Musa was standing in front of the station. See, but on the contrary, what we see when Musa enters the police station, the inspector is very polite to him. He is very lenient in his attitude towards him, but lenience is basically it is fake. That we will come to know only when the movie progresses. Once the movie progresses, the seemingly contradiction in the first scene proved to be false and violent, and the violence which is inherent in police as a grassroots agency of the state is clearly revealed. Now, why Musa had to go to police station? The major reason is that he is basically a Pakistani national, and how he became a Pakistani national, that is significant. That also we should interrogate. Because he was at the time of partition, he was on the other side of the border. I told you he was basically went to Bombay. First he went to Bombay, and then later he was settled in Karachi. We know that Karachi, just like Mumbai, Karachi is also a port city. It had very close cultural and historical connections with the rest of the country, and many people, especially from Muslim community, even from Kerala, they migrated to. Even later in just partition, people were basically migrating to Bombay, for to sustain their family and themselves. Basically, people were migrating to Bombay in search of job. Just like that, people were migrating to Karachi as well before partition. Just like the way in which we moved to Calcutta as well. So why Musa and others like him have to report? So the thing is that now Musa after partition, he came back to India and on a Pakistani passport with a temporary permit, and he settled in Kerala. So, but the thing is that the permit which was given by the Indian state was temporary. He was declared as a Pakistani national because of holding a Pakistani passport, and he resided in India with a temporary permit. This temporary permit is highly significant as far as the Muslims who returned from Pakistan to India is concerned after partition. So because of this reason, because of staying in India with a temporary permit, he has to report to the station by the beginning of every month, and as long as he is staying on a temporary permit for 1 year. So the state issued this temporary permit for 1 year for him, and he has to renew this. The state will look at his activities. If his activities are satisfactory, then he can continue. Otherwise, no, his permit will be cancelled and he will be deported to Pakistan. So why Musa and others like him have to report at Manjeri police station is because they are under the constant surveillance of the Indian state. So for being foreign nationals, they have to ensure that they do not engage in any other activities other than the purpose stated in their application for their visit. So failure on their part to visit the police station will be assumed that they are engaged in espionage activities, and which is considered as a sufficient reason for their deportation. So basically this temporary permit, this raises serious questions on the attitude of the Indian state towards its minorities, as well as the attitude of the Pakistani state towards the same community which they considered as a nation. Like when we go to this Pakistan resolution and Jinnah statements, we can say that he considered Muslims in India as a nation. But once this partition took place, it became a serious issue. Now, what were the reasons behind India's introduction of temporary permits instead of issuing citizenship to those people who were born and brought up in the country and wanted to return to India after Pakistan? Then what happened to the claims of the Muslim League that Muslims in India constitute a nation? These two questions I think we have to address seriously. So Pakistan's attitude towards Muslims after partition shows the hollowness of the claims of the Muslim League that the Muslims in India constitute a nation. In the same way, India's introduction of permit system and its attitude towards its own minorities equally betrays the claims of Nehruvian secularism. Now, we can criticize Nehruvian secularism from different angles, but anyway, not on the basis of like the Sangha Parivar kind of ideology, but still we can criticize Nehruvian version of secularism from the perspective of the rights which are guaranteed by the constitution to the minorities, right? Then why India introduced this permit system? It was mainly because of, and it is closely linked to this rehabilitation issue. Closely linked to this aspect, that is the vacue property. We know many people migrated from Muslims at the time of partition because of this horrific nature of partition. Many people migrated to partition. Immediately after partition, they migrated to their own safer areas. But after partition, once the issue settled, many of them they wanted to come back to their own places. But it created a huge problem as far as the Indian state was concerned. Many people from Indian side, especially from Muslim minority provinces, UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, they all migrated to the Pakistani side. But they were because of their historical and cultural roots, they wanted to come back. But the Indian government did not want them to come back. But at the same time, the Pakistan government also did not want these people. Jinnah died in 1948 itself. But even before he died, he said that the Muslims in India, after partition, the Muslims from minority provinces, they should show their allegiance towards the Indian state and not to the Pakistani state. That was a statement made by Jinnah himself after partition. That was a contradiction involved in the whole Pakistan scheme. Many Muslims, even in minority provinces, many people opposed this his notion of Pakistan. Even Azad, people like Azad. When we look at Kerala, people were there like Abdurrahman. They all opposed this idea of Pakistan, but still people were there in favor of it, and that's why they got it. But after partition, the Pakistani state did not want that the Muslims should migrate from Indian side to Pakistan. They wanted that all the people who were already went there, they should return to their homeland. But along with that, another important development which prompted the Muslims to return their homelands were Gandhi's fast. Immediately after partition, we know that Gandhi took his fast, especially at the time of communal violence which was taking place in northern India, in and around Delhi. So many people were killed, and women were raped. It was in this context that Gandhi took his fast and pleaded for communal harmony. So it was because of that development, and it was basically, when we look at Godse's, even though he said that he was basically favoring Muslims, that he shot him dead, but there are basically other reasons. We have to look at the whole ideology, then only we will come to know that why he shot him dead in January 1948. So it was because of his fast that many Muslims it created a kind of confidence among the minorities who were there especially in Delhi, and it was because of this confidence that things are now settled, nothing will happen to us, and that's why many of the people who migrated to Pakistan, they returned to India. They started returning to India. But the problem was that, so it boosted the morale of Muslims who were there in Delhi, and many who already left for Pakistan also started to return. But this terrified the Indian government, which was worried about the sheer number of returners. See, the problem was that, because of this refugee crisis, when people moved from, Hindus and Sikhs, when they moved from their minority provinces to India, from West Pakistan as well as from East Pakistan, it created a huge refugee crisis, and many of these people, the people who came from the Pakistani side to India, they actually occupied all the properties, houses, then they took the rest of the things, rest of the properties. They captured the whole thing, they themselves. Even though the government declared it as Sivaki property, many of these people, they themselves captured it. So because of this reason, the Indian government could not expel these people. When the Muslims will return and when they demand for their property, the Indian government has to give them their property. If they are citizens, if the Indian government declares these Muslims who are coming back as citizens, then the state is responsible to give them back their property. So if you want to give them their property, then what you have to do? You have to expel all these Sikhs and Hindus from their own property that they have captured. So the government did not want to create another problem. So that is why they did not allow these people to come back. So it was to limit, it was to control their movement that the Indian government introduced the permit system in order to control their return, the return of the Muslim refugees from Pakistan across its western borders. Actually, now, the permit system introduced in the Samayat, ഈ വെസ്റ്റേൺ സൈഡിലായിരുന്നു ഇത് ഇത്രത്തോളം ഒരു റിസെന്റ്മെന്റ് ഉണ്ടാക്കിയത്. ഈസ്റ്റേൺ സൈഡിൽ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അത്രയും പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല. കാരണം ഈസ്റ്റേൺ സൈഡിൽ അപ്പോഴും ദേ ഹാഡ് എ വെരി ക്ലോസ് റിലേഷൻഷിപ്പ് ബിറ്റ്വീൻ people with the western side, East Bengal and West Bengal. They continued that relationship even after the introduction of permit system. So മാത്രമല്ല നമ്മൾ പിന്നെ ഈ പെർമിറ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം പാകിസ്ഥാനി ഗവൺമെന്റ് പെർമിറ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം പിന്നീട് ഇന്ത്യൻ ഗവൺമെന്റ് ഇൻട്രൊഡ്യൂസ് ചെയ്തതിനു ശേഷം പാകിസ്ഥാനി ഗവൺമെന്റും ഈ പെർമിറ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം ഇൻട്രൊഡ്യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ആ സമയത്ത് പാകിസ്ഥാൻ ഗവൺമെന്റ് ഇൻട്രൊഡ്യൂസ് ചെയ്ത പെർമിറ്റ് സിസ്റ്റത്തിന് എതിരെ പാകിസ്ഥാൻ സൈഡിൽ നിന്ന് തന്നെ ഇതിനെതിരായിട്ടുള്ള എതിർപ്പ് വളരെ ശക്തമായിട്ട് ഉണ്ടാവുകയാണ് ചെയ്തത്. പക്ഷേ അതിനേക്കാളും വളരെ സ്ട്രിക്റ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു പൊസിഷൻ ആയിരുന്നു ഈ വെസ്റ്റേൺ സൈഡിൽ പിന്നെ പാകിസ്ഥാൻ ഗവൺമെന്റ് സ്വീകരിച്ചത്. സോ So the Indian government introduced the permit system in order to control the return of Muslim refugees from Pakistan across its western borders. It promulgated an ordinance which made India entering without a permit a criminal and punishable offence in July 1948, and the Pakistan government also followed the same a few months later in October 1948. So in fact, it was a permit system which was the first set of restrictions on movement of people between the two post-colonial states immediately after partition, and the real partition of the state basically happened with the introduction of permit system, because it completely stopped the movement of people from this movement beyond their borders. Partition of which happened with the introduction of permit system, due to which the cross border became highly difficult. Then another problem is that the worst victims of the introduction of permit system by the Indian government was the Muslims who wanted to return to India from the other side of the border, just like Musa and the people like him. The system designed by the Indian state was first rationalized and then uniquely designed to specifically control the movement of the Muslims and fix their belonging. Its intention was not to receive any communities, so this is significant. ഇതെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അന്നത്തെ കോണ്ടെക്സ്റ്റിൽ മാത്രമല്ല, this is significant in the contemporary times as well. The system designed by the Indian state was first rationalized and then uniquely designed to specifically control the movement of the Muslims and fix their belonging. Its intention was not to receive any communities but Muslims, as India did not have any problem with in accommodating Hindus or Sikh refugees from Pakistan. For example, Sardar Patel, he was the then Home Minister, who questioned the loyalty of the Muslims. He never had any inhibition about the minority communities, that is the Hindus and Sikhs from the neighboring countries, and visualized them as Indian citizens. A concession that he was not willing to concede to the Muslim minorities in India. So in order to achieve this mindset, in order to achieve this objective, a mindset was already created even before its introduction among the public as well as in the bureaucracy, that the Muslim returners from Pakistan are the belligerent agents of the Pakistani state, and hence they could not be trusted. So that was a mindset created by the state itself, among the people as well as among the bureaucracy, that is the agencies of the state. Why the police is so brutal towards these people? I told you Shamsuddin, he belonged to a Muslim, he was basically a person from Muslim community, but he was also highly brutal towards his attitude towards his people. Why it was made? Why? Because it was because of the mindset which was created by the state itself among its personnel. So isn't it an irony? This is an irony. You know, basically Shamsuddin and Musa are the two sides of the same coin. Because the people, because Shamsuddin belonged to that minority community. So because of this reason, he should also be loyal towards the state. So in order to show his loyalty, he should be brutal in handling the people. So these two people are the same sides of the same coin, that is their loyalty towards the state. His loyalty is also questionable in a way. That is why he is becoming so brutal than others. We should be, like Rajavinekalam valiya Rajabhakti. It's like that. So the Indian government introduced 5 kinds of permit system for the people who come to India. There were basically 5 kinds of permit system: for temporary visit, for permanent return to India. Basically, this was meant for the Muslims. Then for repeated journeys, for businessmen and officials. And the other one is transit travel, because at that time Pakistan composed of 2 regions, one in the east and the other one in the west. So they could use Indian territory in order to cross from one side to the other. The other one was permanent resettlement. This was basically meant for Hindus and Sikhs from the Pakistani side. So instead of a single set of rules, the introduction of 5 kinds of permit system itself was to make the differentiation of people on the basis of their religion easier. So as it was difficult to get permanent return for Muslims, the most of them traveled on temporary visit category. So because of this categorization, it was just very easy to identify the people in which category you belong. So, but when the Indian government introduced this system, it was very difficult for the Muslims to get permanent settlement visas. The government did not concede that demand. So it was, as it was difficult for Muslims to get permanent return, to get permit for permanent return. Most of them traveled on temporary visit category. So later, as there was lapses, so even though this permit system was introduced by the government, it was not foolproof. So there were lapses. People, even after the introduction of permit system, people keep on migrating from one region to the other, between crossing the borders of the state. So it was because of this lapses in this permit system, the Indian government introduced two acts known as the Influx from Pakistan Control Ordinance and Pakistan Control of Enemy Ordinance, targeting the Muslims, which made overstaying on temporary permit a criminal offence, which is punishable with fines, then imprisonment and even deportation. So people overstaying on temporary permits were arrested, they were put in jail or even deported. So Wazira Seminder, she argues that it was because of the sheer number of arrest and court cases that the citizenship provisions, when we look at the whole Indian constitution, what we can see is that the citizenship provisions were introduced in India on the same day of the adoption of the Indian constitution. That was on 26th November 1949 itself. And the rest of the provisions of the constitution came only in January 26, 1950. So that was the reason. It was her argument. So with regard to the attitude of the Indian government towards Muslim refugees, two articles under the citizenship provision which needs a special mention, they are Article 5 and Article 7. For example, Article 5 established domicile and birth in the territory of India as a criterion for citizenship, whereas Article 7, which dealt specifically with partition displacement, it established that those who had after the first day of March 1947 migrated from the territory of India to the territory now in Pakistan would not be deemed to be a citizen of India. However, a person who, after having migrated to the territory now included in Pakistan, has returned to the territory of India under a permit for resettlement or permanent return would be considered as an exception. So this provision, Article 7, is highly significant as far as the return of Muslims from the Pakistan side is concerned. So in the case of Muslims, the cases on overstaying were settled not on the basis of Article 5. So if the case is settled on Article 5, then gradually the Indian state will give you citizenship. But the case was not settled on the basis of Article 5, but it was settled on the basis of Article 7. So the problem so when we look at the laws, we can see that the problem lied not in the laws, but in its implementation. But the laws itself were framed with this intention. People argue that it was not the problem with the laws, but with the implementation. But when we look at the reasons behind the introduction of this kind of laws itself, we will come to know that it had problems. So the only permit which was available to the Muslims were permit under temporary category. So in such cases, the court adopted the position that the court adopted the position that those who migrated to Pakistan but returned to India on temporary permits and overstaying in the country, invoking their familial ties or their desire to come back, just like the people like Musa, are insufficient evidence belonging to Indian nation. Yet thousands of Muslims, even after the introduction of permit system and even after the introduction of these kinds of laws, thousands of people migrated to Pakistan even without permits, especially through the Kokrapar border in Rajasthan. Now that's Rajasthan side, that is Kokrapar is in Pakistan, but through that border many people who crossed the border to Pakistan, and the problem is that they did not allow the people to come back through that border. It was one-way traffic. You can migrate to Pakistan through you using that border, but you cannot come back through that border. There were many court cases related to this issue. But this continued till 1965, and this Kokrapar border was completely blocked with the 1965 war between India and Pakistan. So as a result, two countries adopted. It was because of the lapses in permit system that the Indian government, India and Pakistan government went for passport system. They introduced passport system because of this permit system. Actually, the irony is that it was basically the Pakistan government which demanded the introduction of passport system, not the Indian government. Even though the permit system was introduced by the Indian government, the passport system was basically a demand from the part of the Pakistani government. It made such a demand because the Muslims going from India to Pakistan could be identified. The purpose was to identify the Muslims who cross the border as Indian nationals. And hence, they could be distinguished from their claims on Pakistan's nation. Now, I told you many of these characters in this movie are basically tortured by the Indian state as well as the Pakistani state. Pakistan police, they were tortured in jails, and many people they lost their mental balance. You can see this. It was because of their torture, the torture that they had faced in Pakistan as well. The reason was this. No, they did not want to identify these people as Pakistanis. No, when we look at these things, we will come to know that every issue basically points out the hollowness of the claim that Muslims belonging to one nation in India. The claim made by Jinnah and the League. So at the same time, when we compare the citizenship provisions, when we compare the citizenship provisions of the Pakistani government with the Indian Citizenship Act, we can see that it was less stringent. So it was easier for the people to get a Pakistani passport than an Indian passport. If you apply for a Pakistani passport, if you are a Muslim from Indian side, then it's very difficult to get. But if you are, even if you are a person from the Indian side, if you apply for a Pakistani passport, it is easier to get. So that is why people like Musa got Pakistani passport instead of Indian passport. It was especially in Karachi. Karachi is basically, Karachi is highly significant because till 1971, Karachi was the capital of Pakistan. Later it was moved to Islamabad. And another thing is that many of the people who migrated from the Indian side to Pakistan, they basically went to the Sindh provinces, and many of them they settled in Karachi. So because of this reason, this Muhajir community, that is the refugees who migrated to Pakistan, their strength was quite high in Pakistan till 1971. And this Muhajir Qawmi movement became quite significant in Pakistan, and after 1971, after the formation of Bangladesh and the division of Pakistan. So hence many Indians who wanted to return to India traveled on Pakistani passports rather than Indian passport. So this is a irony of the claims of the Indian state that it is secular. The claims made by Nehru or the governments till 1970s. But what I'm trying to say is that the problem did not happen with the emergence of Hindutva movement in the 1980s. The problems were already there within the whole framework itself. But neither the permits nor the passport system could control the problem of people crossing borders between the two countries, and the loyalty of the people were always under a check. Hence, when the passport system was introduced, the surveillance mechanisms which were already there with the permit system was extended to the passport system as well, with the intention of preventing undesirable elements from going underground and indulging in espionage activities. So why Musa procured a Pakistani passport as a travel document instead of an Indian passport was because the extensive procedure involved in attaining an Indian passport. See, when we look at the attitude of the Pakistani government towards the whole people who migrated from the Indian side to Pakistan, that also we should closely watch. Because they did not have a uniform attitude towards all the sections of the people. The Pakistani government demanded the businessmen, Muslims from businessmen from Muslim community, businessmen, bureaucrats. They wanted these people should migrate to Pakistan so that they can develop their nation. But at the same time, they restricted the movement of the ordinary people because ordinary people were creating huge liability on the state. They considered this ordinary people as a liability. not as an asset, but they consider the elite sections as an asset rather than a liability. So that differentiation were there even in their attitude. So thus, instead of Indian passports, Muslims opted for Pakistani passports and short-term visas for their place of origin in India. So because of being in Karachi, it was much easier for Musa to procure one because of the sympathetic attitude of the Muhajirs. Muhajirs were the community who migrated to Pakistan from the Indian side to such causes. So, but once they reached their destination, they either discarded their passports and overstayed in their short-term visas or applied for long-term visas, which was the key to become regularized as an Indian citizen. But the number of people who got the Indian citizenship was very marginal, even though they applied. There were several court cases. Many people got, but it was very marginal. But all Pakistan nationals were not. But so the problem lies here. Even though Indian state discriminated, even though even the Indian government did not want that people should come to the Indian side, their attitude towards all the sections were not the same. They created a differentiation between the minorities themselves. They welcomed, just like Patel, the Indian government welcomed Hindus and Sikhs from the other side, but they denied permission to the Muslims, just like the way in which now the Indian government is trying to amend the citizenship laws. So that attitude was there. Forget about the minorities who came from Pakistani or from the Pakistan side or Afghanistan, but the same kind of attitude the Indian government had expressed towards the Israelis as well. When Israel was, it was only after Pakistan, and Pakistan was formed, Israel was created in 1948, 1 year later. But when Israel was created, many people, even from Kerala, they migrated to, from different parts of the world, they migrated to Israel. And many people, when they went to Israel, they were not, many of them were not comfortable with the state and they wanted to return. But the Indian government did not have any problem with those people. They allowed them to come back and settle in India. There were court cases on this issue as well. This is because of the reason that this advocate, Ramakrishnan, when he says that the laws are meant for, he made this comment to Musa that the laws are made for humans. So there is no problem. The law is a last hope. But the problem is that, but Musa is not optimistic because he thinks that it will not make any difference. In this case, as his application for citizenship was rejected by the Indian state 10 years back. So this was the problem with the law itself. And then when we look at the attitude of the state, especially the agencies of the state, the coercive machinery of the state, we can see that they did not make any differentiation between men and women or between. So they applied the same logic in their treatment towards everyone. Even the women were treated in the same way that they treated. See, when we in order to sort out this issue, they approached many people, especially the Muslim political leadership. He was basically a representative of the Muslim leadership in Kerala. But even the Muslim political leadership was also afraid of afraid of taking this issue. Because they were also afraid because their loyalty towards the state will be questioned if they take up such issues. So that was the attitude of the Muslim political leadership in India. They remained submissive throughout the past. They never asserted their voice on the basis of their identity after partition because they were afraid that their loyalty towards the state will be questioned. So basically, Pardeshi is a visualization of the oral histories of partition violence by the state agencies on the Muslims in India while drawing political boundaries and national identities. It portrays how the state uses humiliation as a tool in order to violate individual liberty, a value which is guaranteed by the Indian Constitution to its citizens. Pardeshi attains significance for one more reason, even though there are films based on the stories of the division of families between India and Pakistan, like Garam Hawa. South India is depicted as an area which is completely untouched by the partition violence. But K.T. Kunji Muhammad breaks this myth by focusing his lens on the same location of Malabar, a region where Muslims had revolted against the British in the beginning of the 20th century. So I'll stop here. I think if you'll have time, we can discuss.